Very interesting, significant boost to defence spending. Why has it happened now?
Well, there's no doubt it's happened now because Sir Keir Starmer, whether he admits it or not, is being bounced into making that commitment to raise defence spending by 2007, bringing it forward to that 2.5%. It's still only 0.2%, even though it adds up to £13.4 billion of extra spending. The fact is the MOD has massive structural deficiencies over years and years, decades of salami slicing by previous governments who have thought it expedient to cut more and more from defence, taking advantage of the so-called Cold War dividend from the end of the Cold War to prioritise other domestic issues. So there are big issues within the MOD, big structural issues that need to be dealt with, and much of the extra money will be sucked up in just getting the MOD, getting the military back onto an even keel again before you even talk about an expansion. Remember, the armed forces, the army, has reduced to its lowest level since Napoleonic times. We've got rid of frontline combat ship after combat ship, where the Navy now, although they're producing new frigates and eventually new destroyers, it's in a lamentable state of not being able to field enough of these frontline combatants to do the tasks that the Royal Navy would like to do around the world, the policing operations that are so vital to an island nation like the UK.
So let's put some real numbers on this. We talk a lot about percentages, and it's pretty hard to sort of get your grips on. This year, we spent £53.9 billion on defence spending in the UK. Keir Starmer's saying there'll be £13.4 billion of extra spending. So that, in my quick maths in head, takes it from £53.9 billion to £69.3 billion. That is a significant increase. There is some concern, however, that with that, £13.4 billion annual increase, how much of that is actually just going to replace the munitions that we've been sending to Ukraine? How much of this is backfill to get us back to where we were before this war started?
It's not even Ukraine, as I say. It's, the army in general and the Navy and the RAF have seen frontline air squadrons, ships, and indeed in the army with troop numbers, tanks, other sort of combat systems slowly but surely eroded. So trying to get that back to more sort of potent levels, combined with, as you say, Tom, the fact that we have sent so much of our stocks of ammunition and missiles and other armaments off to Ukraine will absolutely require backfilling, and that's why they want to put industry on a war footing as well. They've spoken about that for a while to increase the level of sort of armament production. And of course, industry won't do that until there are firm commitments from government that the money is there. Now you're getting that firm commitment. This is just a pathway to 2.5%. He is committed there that by 2007 it will increase to 2.5% of GDP. And then, of course, that also desire to get to 3% in the next Parliament. So although that might take a while to get to 3%, if we do go to 3%, that will be a very significant increase indeed in military spending terms, and will make a very big difference, I think, to the resources that the military have to play with and the numbers that they can recruit. And the hope, I think, from the military chiefs will be that if you get a commitment at this stage from a government to go to 3% within the next Parliament, even if it's not Labour that get in the next time round, it would be very difficult for, say, the Conservatives not to be fighting an election campaign on an equal desire to get to 3%.
Absolutely.
Of GDP as well.
Well, for a long time, it did seem politically that there was a reluctance. to actually increase that defence spending. Military chief after military chief, expert after expert said the government needs to do this, needs to prioritise defence. Yes, there's welfare. Yes, there's education. Yes, there's everything else, the NHS, to spend money on. But this should be a top priority. Now, it does appear as though Donald Trump has finally got his way and Keir Starmer has given in. But what pays for this? We understand foreign aid being cut by 0.3%, is it? From 0.5 to 0.2 is going to pay for it. I don't know exactly what those figures would be.
It's 0.5. It's 0.5 down to 0.3.
Is that enough?
Which would pay for the rise that we're talking about.
It
wouldn't, of course, pay for the rise to 3%, should we go to that in the next Parliament. So, yes, there will be some tough choices that will have to be made for that. Even this time around, some tough choices and, budget rejiggling that's going to have to be
This is what Rachel Reeves was saying, according to the papers, saying, well, we're going to have to either raise taxes massively or make huge swathing cuts to various Whitehall departments.
Yeah.
But it seems as though Keir Starmer is telling the public, no, we're just going to cut foreign aid and it will fund all of this.
Well, listen, the number crunchers will be better than me at trying to determine what the actual figures are from that cut in foreign aid and whether that will meet, as Sir Keir Starmer claims, the additional 0.2% to get us to 2.5%. But as I say, it's difficult to understate how or overstate, I should say, how important this announcement is. Whether he's been bounced into the announcement earlier than he probably desired by the messages coming out of the White House and Donald Trump's insistence that NATO leaders must go up to 5% of GDP. That aside, I think this government, the previous government as well, did finally realise that defence spending couldn't continue to be cut year on year, as has been happening, because of the threat that we face now internationally, not just from Russia, but from Iran, from North Korea, from China, and all kinds of non-state actors as well that threaten the UK and its partners.
Now the Germans are saying Europe needs to stand on its own feet when it comes to defence.
Well,
Could we see other European nations bump up that defence spending and quickly?
Well, listen, I think that absolutely plays into this. So you heard from Sir Keir Starmer there saying NATO is the cornerstone. Absolutely, NATO will be the cornerstone. But we don't know how things might mature in a Trump government going forward. We remember in the last Trump presidency, NATO went through a fairly rocky time. Many would say within NATO circles being undermined by Donald Trump. He would say that he was pushing for NATO members to do much more to boost their funding to NATO. Ironically, after that 2022 main invasion by Russia, that really signalled a big shift in many European countries in particular in terms of their efforts to spend more on their defence, which has, of course, also then really, as far as NATO is concerned, emboldened NATO and strengthened NATO amongst these allies.
And this now gets into the context of what are we going to use with this extra money being spent? £13.4 billion extra every single year, taking the budget up from 53.9 to 67.3 billion, i.e. a 25% increase on the amount that we were spending. That's a quarter extra that we're spending on this budget. We're hearing that in Germany, the coalition negotiations following their election is talking about lifting the debt limit. The victorious CDU party wants to lift that debt limit specifically to spend more on their armed forces. We know that France has announced more defence spending too. Could this all be part of a future peace plan for Ukraine that does, in the end, use what the Prime Minister proposed just a couple of weeks ago, British boots on the ground?
Well, I think all of the above, yes. I mean, they are planning for potentially the expected and the unexpected in military terms, because they just don't know how things are going to play out. One, with the negotiations, if we even ever get to the stage where a peace deal is agreed, if a peace deal isn't agreed, and say, for instance, that it is President Zelensky who decides that the terms of that peace deal are just too much for Ukraine to accept, it may well be the case then that America decides, well, that's it, we're stepping back, no more in the way of military aid will go to Ukraine. And then there's a very, very tough choice for these European leaders who have very publicly stated their long-term goal, their support for Ukraine to ensure that that country's sovereignty and ability to fight back against Russia is maintained. Are they going to have to put the money where their mouth is and step in and really also, double which effectively they would have to do to stay still, double the commitment that Europe is giving at the moment to Ukraine? Well, in order to double the commitment to Ukraine, you would be taking a big, big chunk of that 2.5% or the 0.2% increase in GDP
we currently
away.
give about £3 billion a year to Ukraine.
£3.5 billion.
£3.5 billion.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, if we were to double that, that would take this down to just 10 billion increase rather than 13.4.
Yeah.
Still a significant increase.
Depending on our GDP, I suppose, as well.
Oh yeah. Well, if we go into recession,
Yes.
then all of this is moot.
Then all of this is moot.
So I'm not sure we're at the stage yet where the generals and the field marshals and the sort of admirals are going to be sitting around wondering what shiny new pieces of equipment they'll be able to buy. There are still deep structural issues within the MOD that need to be sorted out. More of a guarantee, perhaps, that more of their capabilities, like these incredible, amazing 2 giant aircraft carriers that we have, are not under threat, perhaps, going forward. And maybe they can get them some more of these F-35s that they've long promised but have been very slow in delivering.
Well, let's hope we get a good price for all of this new kit, hopefully.
And Mark, you ask what the generals might make of it. Why don't we ask a lieutenant? Let's hear the thoughts of the defence analyst, former British Army officer, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford. Stuart, thanks so much for being with us. I mean, this is huge news for defence in this country, a 25% spending increase.
Well, it's certainly a move in the right direction, and something that I think all of us with a military interest have been calling for at least the past few years. The defence budget, of course, covers many issues, which you've already noted, including aid to Ukraine, including pensions, and so on and so forth. But there's no doubt that it will be welcomed and begin to perhaps redress some of the mistakes been made in defence funding over the past maybe 20 years or so. Having said that, the one thing I believe that has to be sorted before we buy any more shiny new kit or any new bits and bobs is we have to sort out the personnel problem, because all the shiny new bits of kit in the world are not much use if you don't have the people to operate them. And at the moment, all 3 of our armed services are quite short of personnel.
Your thoughts on how this is going to be paid for, Stuart? So the Prime Minister has told us that this is going to be paid for through cuts to foreign aid. He's not happy about it, but he says it's essential.
Yes, I think that the government has had to reprioritise its spending in the light of the international situation, which includes, of course, the ongoing war in Ukraine and, of course, the conflict in Gaza, but also the Trump administration's early moves in terms of asking or demanding, in fact, that European countries shoulder a bigger part of the burden of defence. So the short-term solution seems to have been to cut the aid budget, and I think many people will find that distasteful, but I think it's a necessary move. But in the longer term, I can't see any other option than taxes to increase, and that includes income tax. And of course, that is deeply unpopular with the electorate.
Say that it might be unpopular to some. A lot of people are getting in touch saying, why not just cut the entire foreign aid budget for defence? So there are lots of different views on that one. But how do we make sure that this money is spent where it needs to be?
Well, there's the very, and perhaps the most important question of all, is that the Ministry of Defence does not have a particularly admirable record in spending taxpayers' money wisely, and particularly in the field of defence procurement. And the organisation needs a complete, as you would say, root and branch reform. And I hope that's going to happen. I think John Healey, the Defence Secretary, has alluded to this in previous statements that he's made. But we have to make sure we spend the money wisely. And it's not just a case of buying more F-35s, although that would be very nice, or more tanks, although that would also be very nice. But it's got to be spent wisely in the correct manner on the correct things. And I come back to the point I made about personnel. We need to make sure that our armed forces are, as far as we can, make sure fully staffed with qualified people to operate any shiny new kit that happens to come along.
What are your thoughts, Stuart, on how this came about? It does appear as though this is about Donald Trump and some of the threats he may have made. Now, he was asking for 5%, wasn't he, from European countries? We're hopefully moving towards 3% by the next Parliament, so in a few years' time. 2.5 is the immediate boost. Does this come down to pressure from the United States?
Well, I think that's a very large part of it, but there has been a considerable realization over the past few months that, given the threats from Russia, etc., that our defence spending has not been adequate. And I think you could almost draw up a list of multiple senior officers who've been saying this for some considerable time. But the catalyst for it happening now, I would say, is definitely the advent of the second Trump administration and him continuing with his theme that Europe has to bear a bigger share of the defence burden. And I think that's why this has come to a head now. And many, like me, would argue, and not before time.
Well, yes, I mean, people like yourself, if I may say that, have been banging the drum for increased defence spending for how many years? For how many years? And ignored mostly, or there's been, vague promises.
Well, we saw
there?
under the last government, we saw Boris Johnson in Madrid announced that it's going up to 2.5. Then Rishi Sunak becomes Prime Minister and cuts it again. Then Rishi Sunak gets into political difficulty and announces a great announcement, 2.5% to be spent on defence. And then Keir Starmer gets in and no such commitment exists. Now Keir Starmer, this is the third time that the third Prime Minister in almost as many years, 2022 I think was the first year that we saw this commitment for it to go up. What are we now, 2025? Third time in 3 years that a Prime Minister has promised to get defence spending up to 2.5% of GDP. But I suppose this is the first time that actually he's spelt out how it's going to be paid for.
Interesting it comes on the day of an energy bill increase announcement. But anyway, Stuart.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there are two audiences for what Sir Keir Starmer has just said. The first is obviously a domestic one, and many of those, like me, who've been banging on about the need to resource defence properly will be pleased that we're now heading in the right direction. But the other audience, of course, will be Donald Trump and the American administration. And I guess it's a sort of sign that Britain, at least, is willing to accede to what Trump has been saying about increased spending in European nations. And I think really the next interesting part will be how this is received when Starmer and Trump meet in America on Thursday.
Crawford, thank you very much indeed for your time. Really appreciate you coming on this. A huge, significant announcement from the Prime Minister, not before time.
No, and I've just been doing a bit of maths here because the Prime Minister...
He's just been doing his maths while I've been talking.
The Prime Minister did seem to say that this number is going up by £13.4 billion every year. That's not just being reported by us, that's been reported by a number of different news agencies in this country. But that would mean that the defence spending is going up by 25%, which would take it over the 2.5%. I've divided that number, 13.4 billion, by 3, because this is 2027, 2028, 2029. That's the rest of the Parliament in the term set out by the Prime Minister. It seems that perhaps this is a cumulative figure over the course of the Parliament, so not £13.5 billion every single year, but £4.5 billion each of the years from 2027, 2028, 2029, which means that the increase in defence spending isn't taking it up to 67.3 billion, but 58.4 billion. Mark, did the Prime Minister misspeak in the House of Commons?
I don't know. We're going to seek clarification from Downing Street and the Ministry of Defence on that one. It would certainly seem that 13.4 billion a year is quite a high figure set against the 53 billion, which is the current annual budget for the Ministry of Defence. So it might be that it is over the remaining 2 and a bit years of the Parliament that figure takes into account. So regardless, it's still a significant increase, and if it's 13.4 billion for those remaining 2 and a bit years, that's good, and it's a boost, and it will be absolutely welcomed by the Ministry of Defence. The increase, or the desire to increase to 3% of GDP will be a very significant boost. But it will be interesting to see, because he's going to be asked on this in the weeks and months ahead, is what the time frame for that is. Is it 3% of GDP by the end of the next Parliament? It's certainly not going to be at the beginning of the next Parliament, because that would just be unmanageable in terms of such a rapid increase by to that 3% of GDP. So it might be by the end of the next Parliament, but still, it's going in the right direction. I think those military chiefs will be very encouraged by this, set against the backdrop, as I say, of a service that they've had to try their best to manage as effectively more and more of their defence budget has been cut away, key assets shelved or sold off.
Yes, I mean, if it was 13.4 billion in 1 year increase, then that would be the entire foreign aid budget from last year. So it's probably not that. It probably is over the course of however many years.
It seems that the Prime Minister must have stumbled a little bit. But let's go across to the former head of the British Army, Lord Richard Dannatt. Lord Dannatt, thanks so much for being with us. This is, of course, a significant announcement from the Prime Minister. But again, we've heard similar announcements like this from both Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson before they seem to fall by the wayside.
Well, yes, I hear what you say, and history will show that. But I think we have to take at face value what the Prime Minister said in the House of Commons just now, and that he is pledging to increase defence spending to 2.5%, and that will come into effect by 2027. Ministers, Prime Ministers, MPs don't like misleading the House of Commons, so I think we have to take that, and it's welcome news. Of course, as other people are saying, this is a step in the right direction, and it's a welcome step in the right direction, but we haven't reached the objective yet. There will be further discussions to be had when we see how world events pan out as to what the proper level of our defence expenditure should be in order for us, as a key European member, to play its role in Europe, given that the United States wants to dial down its role in Europe.
What will this mean for our military and armed forces and, I guess, our security as a country?
Well, I'm not going to give you a shopping list of what needs to be done, but
I was hoping for one.
That's all right. There is an historic legacy of repeated peace dividends being taken from our defence budget, going right back to the early 1990s at the end of the Cold War. And we've accepted increased risk to our military capability. But now, when we're faced with our key partner, the United States, wanting to do less to secure Europe, we've got our principal foe, if you like, Vladimir Putin, a proven aggressor continuing his war in Ukraine. It doesn't take the brains of, well, I won't say an archbishop, because we haven't got one really at the moment, to realise that we've got to spend more on our own defence. So this is welcome. I mean, in the wider world, it's disappointing that we're probably going to plunder the international development budget, because the UK's influence in the world often comes through a combination of our hard power and our soft power, our diplomacy and our development funds. But priorities have to be established, and a priority that's urgent now is spending more on defence. How much more? That'll be debated over the coming years, but going from 2.3 to 2.5 is a significant step in the right direction. So congratulations to the Prime Minister for listening to the argument, doing the right thing, and it'll give him a slightly easier ride with Donald Trump in the White House on Thursday.
Mark White, our Home Security Editor, would like to ask you a question, if that's OK.
Lord Dannatt, I know we've spoken about defence spending on a number of occasions in recent years, but could I just push you on that? I know you don't want to get into shopping lists, but surely one of the most important things to be able to do with a bit of extra headroom in terms of a budget is to reverse this current programme to reduce the army size down to that of Napoleonic times.
Oh, I like you very much. You're kicking a ball at an open goal there. And you're absolutely right. The army has never been as small as it is. And of course, put it in the wider context of if there is a serious possibility of the UK joining other European countries in putting a peacekeeping force into Ukraine to carry out a mission of some sort or other, we will need numbers. And it's not just a question of sending 5,000. The way we do our business is, because these are human beings we're dealing with, have lives to lead. When we send 5,000, that means 20,000, because we've got 3 other groups going around the cycle: training, preparing, carrying on with what they need to do, getting ready to deploy. So yes, this increased money, there'll be lots of calls on where it should go to, but certainly one of the major calls is not just army numbers, but also army equipment. There's been a serious underfunding of the army's equipment for quite some time. So this is good news, a step in the right direction, but we've got a long way to go.
And Lord Dannatt, are you confident that other European countries will follow suit?
Well, it's a lovely question. I can't possibly be confident. There is a track record of the UK leading, and I think that's welcome. I would like to think that France and Germany won't be too far behind, and maybe Monsieur Macron will probably want to match 2.5 quam colorime. I mean, well, that's what the Latin said, isn't it? As soon as possible, anyway.
Yeah, it does seem, however, that there is often a tendency with countries around the world to fight the last war. And very often we build up the capabilities that would have been perfect in the war that was just fought. I wonder, with the big capital expenses that the MOD is making, our new aircraft carriers, the other large investments, I know we're designing a new supersonic aeroplane. I mean, all of these things, are they not going to be irrelevant in a world of AI, drones and asymmetrical warfare?
Well, you ask a very good question, and of course that is a almost daily challenge to the scientific community involved in the Ministry of Defence. We have to look back at last wars and see what went well and what didn't go well. We have to keep an eye on technology. Of course, the most instructive set of events at the present moment is to look at what is going on today in Ukraine. And there is a combination of high-tech capabilities and some low-tech capabilities. There is trench warfare, gutter fighting going on, but that's enabled by modern communications. It's hugely influenced by the proliferation of drones, both to observe and to attack other drones. So we have to be really open-minded to monitor and be with and try and get ahead of, where possible, that's where research and development is so important, movements in military technology. I'm afraid going from 2.3 to 2.5 is a useful shot in the arm, but as I said a moment or two ago, it's not the answer. There is a long way to go if we're going to have the military capability that we need, that others will respect, that Putin will respect, to make sure that we play our part, a major role in the future security of Europe.
OK, well, Lord Richard Dannatt, thank you very much indeed, former head of the British Army, just reacting to that news, 2.3 to 2.5% GDP on defence spending. Interesting what Lord Dannatt said there about the foreign aid, how that will be missed. Because a lot of people seem to think it's a complete waste of money.
And yet it seems that there's a big political element to this announcement today as well. Mark White, the Prime Minister has made a clear choice. What do you make of the idea that there will be some parts of the world that will miss British influence now and that this might actually damage our security in a wider sense?
Well, there is absolutely a case to be argued on that point that soft power is a vital component in trying to ensure better relations with countries that otherwise might go down a different route, or individuals within that country might go down a different route. And, of course, just in terms of global stability anyway, it has got to be a good thing to try to do as much as possible, individual countries around the world, to lift those other countries that are perhaps a bit less fortunate up. But there's the reality of the situation that we face and the more pressing need here back home to ensure that our country is best defended against what is a very real important threat around the world. And as I said before, it is not just Vladimir Putin in Russia and what is playing out in Ukraine or even here in the UK on occasions as well, but it's much further afield. In the Middle East, well, thankfully we're at a situation at the moment where we've had some kind of cessation in southern Lebanon and in Gaza for the time being. But as we know, history tells us that region could flare up at any point. Iran is a continued threat to that region. North Korea, China, there are many threats out there that Britain needs to play its part in defending against.
Indeed, and yet nuzzled within that statement was a nugget of information on migrant hotels. Because Keir Starmer said before the House there that as the migrant hotel programme is wound down, there will be billions of savings that then could maintain projects overseas. Because we know migrant hotels are currently funded out of the foreign aid budget. I mean, is this a realistic possibility? Does the government actually think that we're going to shut these migrant hotels and clear the backlog?
They just secured them for another 4 years, haven't they, Mark?
There's the wish and there's the reality. And the reality is, despite Labour's avowed aim to end the use of migrant hotels, which reached more than 450 migrant hotels under the Conservatives, Labour actually have increased again the number of migrant hotels since he came to power, because they've been faced with the reality that the numbers coming across the English Channel, far from slowing down, with Keir Starmer vowing to smash the gangs, have actually increased. And last year we finished on significantly more boats that crossed the Channel than the previous year. Okay. And they have to be housed somewhere.
I'm a bit worried that we're not going to be spending enough money on shrimp health in Bangladesh.
I'm sure that's at the forefront of many voices. Mark, we will see you again very shortly, of course, keeping across this story throughout the day here